What is up, fellow anti-netter? Hey, in researching Zettelkasten, one of the things that I actually came by way of byproduct of doing that was getting very intimately familiar, and yes, sexually intimately familiar with Nicholas Luhmann. I'm just kidding. With Nicholas Luhmann's writings and his research. And Nicholas Luhmann is, the last biggest kind of like originator, put his biggest stamp on Zettelkasten as all of the, hip PKM kids know it. And of course, the hip PKM kids, that hang out in the Reddit Zettelkasten, have basically been propagating a bastardized digital version, which is essentially just an opinionated philosophical version of using Obsidian and making Obsidian a little bit more friction-filled than it actually is. So anyway, before I go down that frickin' rabbit hole, I'm going to pull myself out of it and talk about Nicholas Luhmann. Now, Nicholas Luhmann's sociological theories, like underpinning it, was that of systems theory and a almost ironical, paradoxical approach to thinking about how society works. And, when we think of society and human interactions and human systems, there's just so much complexity that one falls into the trap of the oversimplification fallacy, which is we try to oversimplify everything. And one of the best mechanisms in mental models for doing that is to lump everything in the duality paradigm of good versus bad. And the problem with that is that, that is not an accurate representation of reality or how society works. However, it does produce a lot of productive results. When we look at things as good versus bad, it allows us to, operate in life without having to overanalyze every single situation in a mutually exclusive way by itself. Okay, that's all fine and good. Okay, so looking at the world through a paradigm of duality, good versus evil, good versus bad, allows us to function better and, operate and navigate the world better, okay, in a more productive way. That's fine. However, it is not necessarily accurate. What is more accurate is, and F. Scott Fitzgerald, as you probably know, I'm a fan of his writing and just kind of fascinated with his work. He once said a sign of first-rate intelligence is that of being able to hold two competing and contradictory ideas in your mind at the same time and believe both of them to be true and yet still be able to function. And that is really reflective of Nicholas Luhmann's theories. There is no good and evil. There is both good and evil, and they exist at the same time. And based on their perspectives, they are both operating, in a way that makes sense for them, given their environment and their conditioning and like the biochemical makeup of how their brains work, right? Like two different people. And this is not really a popular thing to say, but like, in their own mind, they want the best. They're not trying to necessarily do evil. They're trying to do what makes sense, in their own mind. Okay. So, with that, I was talking to Lil Anti-Nut, Nicholas Gassier, aka my protege, yesterday, and he went on a retreat. And I've been without him. He was like in a cabin in some philosophical genius retreat where, it was the retreat collected a bunch of young individuals. And by the way, I'm kind of bastardizing the description. I don't really fully understand it. All I know is it was a program, a retreat for extremely intelligent kids. Okay. And the retreat was sponsored by, the Effective Altruism and the Effective Altruist group. And it's a kind of a philosophical group. And, it's Effective Altruism has kind of taken a beating in its reputation lately because of the FTX founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, was basically an effective altruist, and one of their tenets is that it's actually philosophically the most prudent and beneficial thing for society to make as much money as possible, as fast as possible, so that you can spend the rest of your life allocating it in ways in which you see fit, and meaning donating it, right? Of course, Sam Bankman-Fried, he went about it by essentially skirting the rules and defrauding a ton of people and playing way too fast and loose, right? And so effective altruism has kind of taken a beating. However, apparently the group is still active, and there are still very bright and smart individuals that are that are kind of propagating and teaching it and spreading their message and their philosophy. Well, anyway, Nicholas and I were talking, and I won't share any private details of our conversation or anything. Not that there was anything overly private or confidential, but he shared something with me, and apparently there was some lively debates, philosophical debates, about certain topics. And Nicky G was telling me about how their whole philosophy is based on totalitarianism. Should you basically sacrifice one life to save 100 lives? And the effective altruism, totalitarianism kind of philosophy says, yes, of course, all lives are equal, and you should sacrifice one life to save 100 lives. And yet, that's when Nicholas and I were talking, and he brought up, and he's like, that's not necessarily so cut and dry. And if you've ever seen those philosophical exercises where there's a train track, and you have to pull a lever to prevent a train from killing a certain number of people, we're kind of getting into that field of territory here. Anyway, what Nicholas brought up and told me was really kind of fascinating. And it was that essentially the arguments and that the effective altruism movement makes are somewhat valid. They bring up that animals have consciousness, meaning they have self-awareness, right, and feelings, right? And we as humans have created these massive animal killing factories, right? And that's not necessarily ethically commendable. Okay, now the solution that the effective altruists take to that dilemma and that problem is to just become vegan. And what Nicholas was saying is that I agree that that's a problem. These mass slaughterhouse farms is a problem, but the solution isn't so cut and dry. The solution isn't just, hey, become a vegan and you'll solve that problem. It's a little bit more complex than that. And that's one of the things that the reason I'm bringing this up as an independent writer and creator and thinker is when you look at your own product ladder, and by a product ladder I mean the different products that you offer your people. There are going to be things in your product ladder that are, and it's also known as a value ladder, that are, seemingly, it's why should I even offer this product? In terms of the amount of work and the amount of revenue, it doesn't necessarily make sense. Okay, so an example of this would be I have my physical monthly newsletter, the Scott Shepherd letter, and I also offer, on a very limited basis, other higher levels of, training and, teaching and marketing help and all of that, right? And when I look at it, for instance, my daily consult fee for someone to fly out and for me to strategically design and think through their entire business model, their entire messaging, everything, right? that fee for me that I charge is $25,000 for one day. Okay. And, when you look at the amount of like revenue that brings in compared to, I then have another product offering, another product in my, value ladder, which is my physical monthly newsletter, which is, a monthly fee of like around $50 a month, at least at the time of this recording. It'd probably go up at some point. And I spend so much time, like almost like 2 weeks every month, and not really like 2 weeks straight. I spend a day writing it by hand and then kind of putz around, do other stuff and, edit it a few times, print it out, edit it, go through the whole process. And, it's a lot of work. It's probably just as much work for me as the $25,000 per day consult. Now, one would think, hey, if it's a simple dualistic, simple, good versus bad problem, hey, why don't you just like only take on $25,000 a day clients? Like, why don't, if that's the same amount of work, why don't you drop the physical monthly newsletter, right? And the thing is in your value ladder, in the things that you offer, you want seemingly contradictory things. You want things that, take a lot of effort and don't necessarily cost much and don't necessarily bring in even as much money as like a $25,000 per day consult. And then you also want those, killer, big high ticket items as well. And here's the key. You do not want to just cut off one of them. You need to be kind of like F. Scott Fitzgerald's quote, and you need to hold both of those things in your mind at the same time and do both of them. Because, for me, if I just focused on, high ticket, high paying, high value clients, like a $25,000 a day client, all of my thinking, all of the hard work that I do every single month would slowly but surely deteriorate. Like I am forced every single month to sit down and create and write by hand and think and develop things that make a massive impact and help independent writers, creators, and thinkers. And if I just tried to choose the lazy way of just choosing one thing, right? Like my high ticket consulting, everything else would deteriorate. And, that's the thing that you have to be okay with. I mean, simplicity. And by the way, like I've chosen the simplest business model. I'm not asking you to take on more complexity. I'm just telling you to basically not oversimplify. I'm telling you to be contradictory. I'm telling you to take on a very hard task, in your product catalog and a hard thing to fulfill. And also a very relatively easy thing to fulfill that costs a ton of money. And because, each type of customer, each type of client, like my client that paid me the $25,000 a day, right, thing, certainly there was a ton of value and ton of ideas and ton of strategies and ton of things that I introduced him to that came by way of that, of course. And there were also, things that him just taking the time and even just spending $25,000, him doing that. And by the way, he, has a very successful business. He's done very freaking well. And that $25,000 is something that, he by now, at least, if not by now, and it's been like 3 months at least since my consult with him, I guarantee he's at least, recouped that cost. And if he's not, like in a year from now, he's going to turn that into $250,000. Just that, even just one idea that came from that session. In 10 years, that's going to be like, 2.5 million, maybe even more, right? So there are different kind of things and different products and different offerings that you want to think about and offer to your people. So anyway, hopefully that gives you an idea of what to think about when creating your own product catalog. You want to have seemingly contradictory products in your product catalog. If you just have one thing, if I only had a physical monthly newsletter, which, I very well could. And for, a while I have, and it's been fine. You can have a multi-six-figure income stream doing just that. However, as old Dan Kennedy once said, a business of one is a business of none. So you also need to diversify a little bit. And I don't mean diversify by going from doing one thing to doing 5 things. I mean diversifying by going from doing one thing to going and doing 2 things. All right. Anyway, hope that provides some insight, some value, and always remember to stay crispy, my friend. Peace.